Everybody was kung fu fighting. Those kids were fast as lightning.
Okay, that's enough of my singing career. Welcome to Podcast 18, and we are going to talk about everyone was kung fu fighting. What are we talking about? Well, it's easy. What kind of defensive tactics program exists probably in your agency or in your community for law enforcement officers? When was the last time they were updated in that? If they only received it during the basic training era, which means the academy, 20 years later they're still there, no updates, is there a liability involved? Also, if I go out on my own and I learn a martial art and I am accused and maybe found at some point guilty of excessive force, will I be held liable, or will the agency cover me, or will the agency disown me and forget who in the world am I? All these questions we're going to look at. And we're also going to look at the failure. That's right, we need to talk about failures of law enforcement agencies in keeping officers battle ready. Battle ready. You know, there are probably 3 subjects in any conversation that you just do not want to talk about for lack of a dispute. I mean, seriously, there have been families removed from some of these conversations, 3 and 4 generations. There have been countries that have gone to war on some of these issues I'm going to talk about. There are people that despise one another because they dwelt and they tangled in these rude subjects. And they are the following. I do want to warn you that if there is a young child anywhere in the room, please cover their ears. The first topic is politics. You can lose entire generations because of political affiliation. That's right. You're on the wrong side. They don't like you. They think you're a commie. Blah, blah, blah. The other topic is religion. You think you know it all. But I am who I am. I'm a free spirit. I want to put on my incense and just think about who I am spiritually, like a butterfly. Then the rest of the family said, what are you, nuts? Don't talk to him no more. He's nuts. And the third one, the one that wars could be started over, which is the true and beneficial martial art. Yeah, folks, this is going to get deep. It is going to get deep. Now, before we get into the mix here, for lack of a better term, you want to connect with us. How do you do it? I say it over and over. You go to Google. Let's go to Google. It's on everybody's phone, everybody's computer, and you punch in L as in Lima, just the letter L, Police Radio. Or you go to LPoliceRadio.com. Or you find us on Facebook on the LPolice Radio. or you find us on Twitter as LPolice R. That's the handle. But you can find us. And once you find us, every Thursday we load up a new program and a new series. This series that you're hearing now is Everybody Was Kung Fu Fighting. What we're looking at, well, law enforcement agencies and the defensive tactics programs that they have. Are there officers that are active? Are they ready for combat? And especially in today's law enforcement society as well. Now, we talked about how terrible this subject is. You can lose generations of families and so forth. But the conversation has to be had as to not everything is a gun and a taser. I have tremendous respect for the profession that I did for many years, 27 years, and especially for those that kept in the physical realm more so than the firearm realm. Now, what I'm trying to say is there was those people that they were just obsessed with going shooting. And there's nothing wrong with that, folks. There isn't. But I had always much respect for those that would train in something. Now, I was one of those unfortunate individuals in my agency that this is how the program worked. You graduated from your academy setting, and then you had a progression of mandatory in-service training, maybe every 4 years from the time you graduated. And sometimes that math was all mixed up. The 4 years translated to 6 years. You had people hyperventilating, am I ever going to go to training? But regardless of the fact, you would go to training, and they would teach you 40 hours of mandatory in-service, and there was never room for anything like defensive tactics. And as you advanced in your career, you did this every 4 years. There was no defensive tactics positioning for you or academic update for you. So it left you to believe what the agency was really saying, and that was, no. The defensive tactics that you received in the academy is more than adequate. Or better translated, it's up to you to keep up the proficiency. Now, all proficiencies, if they're not kept up, you lose them. You don't just keep the proficiency forever. You have to train. So it's basically the agency telling you, well, you haven't kept up the proficiency that we paid and trained you in defensive tactics. That's on you. Now, is it a cop-out? Of course it is. People get older, things change. And in my career, there was certain aspects, one called the LV&R, that was outlawed because it was like a real chokehold, and certain suspects had died, and as a result, they outlawed it. But it was shown in the academy, so it was removed. So the agency was real quick on writing a memo telling you can't do this anymore.
Taxi!
So it was hypocritical, obviously, and it's hypocritical because of economics. So that leads us into the foundation that if the agency is saying that I have to be up to par on what I was taught, here are a couple questions. What the hell was I taught? Where did it come from? And the instructors that I have, what were they proficient in? Now, of course, I know some of you people are yelling at your speakers right now saying, if you went to an academy, you have a state curriculum. Hello, state curriculum. What are you talking about? What I'm talking about is, where the hell did the state curriculum come from? What is the background of the defensive tactic that you're learning or you've learned under what martial art so I can continue my proficiency. Now, because of the Department of Justice, agencies have been ruled to have excessive force, certain issues where suspects have been choked out and killed, keeping these agencies. I know New York City has their mandatory in service every 5 years, and a part of that, you will have defensive tactics. Now, what happens with that is the reverse effect. Officers go in every 5 years, they get older, they gain weight, they go in for a defensive tactics refresher, and they all leave like leopards and crippled mutes. And all of a sudden they're on light duty, restricted duty, and all the other bad duties that they can find because the agency made me do physical labor. And that happens. Is it a large percentage? No, but nevertheless, it's a percentage. But here is, I respect those agencies that are doing the right thing, getting the right instructors. Here's my view. And everybody, if you're listening to the show, you know that I had those hot topics. I've got one hot topic on the bulletin board, and that's it. That is law enforcement officers that retired should be offered a part-time basis in their old agency or any other agency where they preside because they would beneficially that agency working on a part-time basis instead of getting a novice. And we discussed how the unions wouldn't like that and blah, 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 blah. But we know that everybody working together, we get that done. So that's a hot topic. My other hot topic now is every academy setting, wherever you go to get an update of your certificate, of your law enforcement certificate, should have defensive tactics instructors. Follow me here. You got it. You know where I'm going with this, but not necessarily what the state taught you in curriculum. That was already the legal requirement, get you through the door. Now the agency's got to grow some chutzpah and get some professional martial artists on staff to teach people. Yep, that's what they have to do. So, our first segment, what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about, these are 3 segments. They will last till February 1st. This segment, and everybody was kung fu fighting. So we're really going to spend some time on this. We're going to talk about karate. We're going to talk about judo. We're going to talk about Jiu-Jitsu. Okay? We're going to vaguely talk about some other martial arts. I could be here for years talking about all these other martial arts. But we're going to look at those basic elements. But before we get in that, we're going to do our first interview, and that's going to be on karate and the subject of it and how does that work or not work for law enforcement officials. So, let's bring in our next guest. We got the new police escort to bring our guest in now in our segment splitter. I was putting on music before. Some people thought that was the end of the show, and later to say, oh, there's more. So we got this little motorcycle segment thing, okay? It's supposed to be cute. The guest that we're going to talk to, and we're going to discuss the issue of karate, is none and only than Alpha Mike, and that's me. I wanted to come on and wanted to discuss my life experience with this art, how I used it in my law enforcement career, and how did I end up in this discipline, and did I look at other disciplines, and when I got there, how long was I there, what did I achieve, and what did I learn? So, of course, it's a little odd because I'm interviewing myself, but we'll move along. Karate and the principles of it. When I went into this journey in the early 90s, I had no idea um, that I would end up in karate. But I had a dear friend of mine, someone that I admired and I still admire, somebody that had dwelled in the martial arts for probably at the time we got into this venture, he had probably had 40 years or 35 years in martial arts because he started at the young age of 5. And my friend Peter, that I had known before I got into law enforcement, had studied Judo, dwelled in Jiu-Jitsu, Aikido, and Karate, as well as some other forms of martial arts, but concentration mostly on the list that I gave, and reaching certain levels in all of them. But we had worked together prior to law enforcement. We were in the hotel security business that doesn't exist today. And we worked together on a midnight tour. And we had, hours of hours in the middle of a hotel doing freaking nothing, just talking about who we were. And I started learning about his love and his passion for martial arts. And he showed me various techniques, and he'd bring in a book and a magazine, and sometimes he'd lend me a movie, a VCR movie. Yeah, so young kids don't know what that is. Just ask your parents or your grandparents; they'll tell you. And I would play it and watch it. This is all pre-Google and YouTube era, if you can go back that far. And I was interested in what I was watching. Well, as I moved on in the late 80s, I took the plunge at law enforcement. And I had actually tried to get into law enforcement in the mid 80s, mid 86, 87, around there. But there was a terrible incident that occurred for a lot of law enforcement officers that delayed their careers called the Miami River. And we're not going to get on that subject because we could be here for days. But all law enforcement agencies in Miami went into a huge panic about who they had hired because the FBI was poking its nose around at agencies' hiring practices because of this incident called the Miami River. And as a result, a lot of agencies had a suspension of hiring until they revamped their hiring process and their background investigations. So you kind of sat around and waited a lot. And I know I was one of those casualties. And I still had my friendship with Pete. I finally do get into law enforcement. Pete is trailing behind me. I helped him get into the agency that I was in. And we started our career. During that early stage of the career, Pete had the ability to handle himself very well. And even when he was in the academy, a lot of people would talk about his abilities. Mild-mannered, if you saw him walk right past you, you'd have absolute no knowledge that he had any law enforcement abilities whatsoever, and that he was probably the most dangerous individual on that block, in that building, or maybe even in the city that you were in. But there was, now that I am a martial artist or a karateka, there were indicators. And one of the indicators was his hands and his fist. I didn't really notice it when I was not in that life, but now, of course, it's easily identifiable for me. So we planned, because there was great use of forces during that era when we started. There was no, secondary weapons like they have today with the utility belt, Batman's utility belt with everything on it. You stopped resisted action with your first weapon that you had, or your primary weapon, which was your hands. You laid hands on people. You were taught that at the academy level. And and I'll get more into the academy training that I had received prior to that later on. So I tell Pete, look, we're never going to get any updated training. They don't give that here. And we know that there's a great need to execute force. So if you don't mind, why don't you show me 2 or 3 schools, and I'll make the decision which one I want to go to. So off we went. First stop that we went to, Peter took me to Miami-Dade College and to see the judo program there from a judo master by the name of Williams that was there, and I believe he still might be there. And I saw the class. I met the instructor, and I was humbled. But the first thing that came into my mind, being I might have been 26, 27 at the time, I would think about these blasting people or blasting myself into the floor and sustaining an injury that could cost me my career that took so long to get in through the front door because of all the pom-pom girls and their hysteria in hiring practices. And I've heard of judo when I was younger, and I liked it. But I told Pete, let's continue our journey. I'm not going to check it off just yet, but we're going to continue our journey. And we did. The next stop, he took me to an Aikido. It's almost a foreign language today, school that was in Miami. And I remember going to, it was somewhere down south, going to it, and we went up the stairs and where the dojo was at. And we started watching them, and their class was in procession. But they had, to me, and no disrespect to anybody that follows that, I saw them with, to me, they were costumes. And I said, no, I was already turned off. And they were kind of like twirling in the air, ballerinas. And I turned your arm or I bent your wrist and you bent in the direction that I bent it with no resistant force, the opposite direction, and you would flip over. And I said, wow, this is the stuff I see on movies that Steven Seagal does. This is incredible. So Pete tells me, what do you think? I go, I think it's only for movies. He laughs and tells me, yeah, I studied it. It's pretty good for a knife attack. And that's if it's not a real knife attack, over the head knife attacks. people don't really attack you that way. Then he proceeded to show me the real way to attack somebody with a knife. And I said, no, this is like movie stuff, man. I don't see this people flying in the air stuff. So he goes, okay, well, I'll take you to last school, and then we'll come up with, whatever decision, which one you want to attack. And he took me to JKA Karate, or JK Miami. JK standing for Japan Karate Association. And we walked in there. We got there a little late. We were like off a little bit by the time that it started and so forth. So when we had got there, the class was in session, and they were doing something called kata. And I watched. The first thing that struck me was they were sweating profusely. The second thing that struck me, they were exhibiting force. They were really throwing punches. They were really throwing kicks. And even though it was kata, meaning they themselves were the opponent, there was no opponent in what I was watching. But I started to become interested. And while we waited maybe 35, 40 minutes for the class to end, Pete tells me, well, what do you, he would interrupt me every so often. He goes, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? And I think, I'm looking at this and I think I found the one I want to take. So he goes, good. As soon as the class is over, I'll introduce you to the sensei. So the class ends. He had met the sensei back in the early 70s, according to the story that he told me, while driving through Miracle Mile in Coral Gables. He saw a Japanese fellow punching a tree, a huge tree, and kicking it with the bottom of his foot. He was using the tree as what is called the makiwara, or punching bag. So Peter had stopped to ask and talk to him, and he basically told him that he was an instructor for JKA and told him, where the school was located and so forth. That was the early 70s, and Peter became a student. Later, during the time he was studying in his school, he joins the military, and off he goes, where he became special forces in the Army. And so he kind of puts that karate training to the side. So here we are. We're going to meet this sensei, and he introduces me to him. And the first thing that I could not take my eyes off were his feet. He had huge feet. And he shook our hand, and he was introduced. And I remember he was very humble. So he asked Peter what he was doing. He told him he was an officer, and then back and forth in the conversation. And he told him I was one too, and that we were interested in taking part in karate. So he said, good. You come. We start. I show. And that was my introduction to JK Miami and my instructor, Saito, Yasuyoshi Saito, where for over a decade he would be my instructor, of course my sensei, my mentor in this journey. And I remember the first day I walked in to the school, I had what they gave me was a gi and the white belt, and I really didn't even know how to put the belt thing on. And everybody had gotten dressed and ran out so fast, including Peter. I was still trying to fumble around with this belt. Sensei walked into the locker room and he told me, let me show you how to put on the belt. And he kind of dressed me. And off I went onto the dojo floor. Now, there are different, of course, rankings, different belt systems. One important thing that when we look at this segment, we're never going to master anything in a couple of sessions, such as a police academy setting or curriculum, where you come in, I show you a couple moves, you practice them 3, 4, 15 times, you're a master. And I turn over to you the belt, and off you go. It doesn't exist, folks. This is one of these items where agencies have to give more commitment, hot topic item, have people on staff, give officers the ability prior to, during, or after their tour of duty to practice their skills on what's being taught, whatever martial art discipline the agency chooses. All right, so we got off sidetrack there. So I start going up the ranks. I start learning the different katas, abilities of komite, which is sparring, and flexibility. We did a lot of flexibility drills, and sweating was profusely. It was a dojo floor, and I will put a picture of the dojo on LPoliceRadio.com so you could see it. And it's pine floor, a pine wooden floor. So imagine in Miami, no air conditioning. Sometimes he was nice. He'd have the windows open so you got a little breeze, a little bit of a breeze. But sometimes no windows open. So the floor was extremely slippery, and it was up to you to make sure that you had good footing. That was part of the training as well. And I went up in the different ranks. They were white, yellow, orange, green, brown, and black. And I don't think I missed anything there. And they're different Q tests, they call them. Everything's a Q test up until brown, and then it goes into Dan testing, which is black. And I had about a decade under my belt system when it was time to get to black. I can't tell you in, a 10, 15-minute segment what I went through in that decade. But I could tell you I enjoyed it. I could tell you it challenged me. It was the most difficult thing that I had set my mind to accomplish because the opponent was me. When I did kata, that was my opponent. And I learned from that. And every class that I had and over that decade was given by my instructor, Saito. And more officers started coming to school or to the dojo with us, where we ended up maybe with 15 or 20 of us. Of course, not everybody made it. Some people made it beyond white belt and disappeared. But they dropped out of different rankings for different reasons, and some stayed. So our class, which was a 12 in the afternoon class, we would work actually the afternoon tour, and we would come in and either shower there, get dressed, go to work, or run home and take a shower and do all that, and then go to work. For a decade, we did that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. I believe Friday, the dojo was closed for that afternoon, and we came in back on Saturday. They were 11 o'clock. We couldn't wait. Sunday off, and Monday we couldn't wait. We were back there again. And there were challenges or during our instruction. I persisted in my attainment for that position of learning, not necessarily a belt. There were so many officers, it got to the point that during our training session, Sensei said, since everybody here was an officer, he would teach us traditional karate as resulting for the results of law enforcement and how to apply the principles of komite and kata to that tradition. And it was mind-boggling. I learned it. He taught us from ground fighting when, he had one principle, and that was to kill with one blow. So everything was a punch and a kick. That is the principles of karate. But eventually, he would lean into us other katas that showed similarities of ground fighting and how we could attack with our feet, knees, elbows, fist, you name it. And locks, certain lock positions and so forth. There was katas such as teki that produce a lot of quick movement. And the origins of karate actually come from Okinawan te, Okinawan karate. And of course, Funagoshi, Genshin Funagoshi was a student of Okinawan karate, Okinawan te, and he brings what he learned to the mainland of Japan in the late 40s. And as a result, the metamorphosis from Okinawan te to karate, and it's basically taught in Japan and in the university systems coming from the island of Okinawa. We can be here all day with the originality of martial arts and where did it come from. That's not what I'm trying to emphasize here, folks, please. I'm trying to concentrate on the law enforcement aspect, and I'm bringing in 3 martial arts of an array of many into light here. So one of the things that really attracted me to the JKA system, the Japan Karate Association system, was that there was lineage. There was no question of what you were learning. Is it an adulterated system of it, or is it pure? Well, I can trace it all the way back to the early 1900s, Genshin Funagoshi learning and his different Okinawan teachers. But we're going to start with Genshin Funagoshi because he brings his form of Okinawan te or Okinawan karate to Japan under his pen name that he used to write, Shotokan, and it becomes Shotokan Karate. And there's where the name is born. JKA is an association that was built around Shotokan, and it structured Shotokan Karate into a more paramilitary structure. So, the lineage, how important is that? It's extremely important. You want to learn from the best. You don't want an adulterated system of something else, or somebody learned it from a third cousin removed and told you that it was authentic. No, you want to learn from the horse and the horses, the style. My lineage in JKA is simple. Genshin Funagoshi, founder of Shotokan Karate, his student, Masatoshi Nakayama, creates the JKA system. One of his students is Hiroshi Soji, JKA, and Soji's student was Yasutoshi Saito, my sensei. That's it. We don't have 150,000 other names in the middle. So, was I learning traditional karate? The answer, of course, is yes. But I was also being introduced to something that has aborted martial arts, that has plagued martial arts, and that will continue to plague martial arts for many, many years to come, and that is sports. Karate, like judo, like other martial arts, have been watered down to include the komite or the sparring or the sports element to that martial art. So it goes from the traditional, which is the deadly, to the sports, which is adventurous and competition and watered down. Some schools are watered down to such a position that it's detrimental to the art itself. I was fortunate that during my karate training, my sensei, because of my profession, took a group of us to the side for many, many years and taught us traditional karate, not necessarily komite, sports. We did do komite, which is sparring, but in the traditional aspect, he would have us slow it down to about a 25% level, then 50, 75, and then into 100. And the reason you would slow it down is you didn't know what your opponent was going to do. Your opponent had no idea what you were going to do. You go back and forth, and you would see his or mistake, and you would immediately capitalize on it on a slower mode. When you went at a full 100 percentile, that mistake they made was accent that much bigger. And I learned that right away. So it, it helped me out tremendously, everything that I learned in the JKA system. In 1993, my sensei, through the death of Masatoshi Nakayama, I believe in 77, 78, the tradition of JKA started to have interfeuding as to style and content. And, over several years of bickering and fighting, instructors in the JKA system were leaving. Most of them to start their own karate programs, not schools, but their own styles. And they would take the JKA format and they would tweak that. And my sensei, Sensei Saito, made that call too. I was a part of those meetings that he had with the entire dojo. Should he stay JK or should he leave? And the end result, the students all told him, it's up to you, Sensei. We don't even have knowledge in that world, only what you've taught us. So he decided to reach out to his sensei, which was Hiroishi Soji, which encouraged him to do what he believed in. And our sensei eventually does leave the JKA system, and he starts his own system, which is Japan Karate Do International. And there are schools, Miami, Venezuela, Orlando, all over. But it was rooted what I learned. I was so blessed, so fortunate to learn something that was rooted in tradition of karate, the strength of karate. What is a makiwara training, kata, komite, elements, different positioning of combat, distance. Sensei used to always tell us, when your opponent weighs more than 50 pounds, you're already up a huge mountain to try to overcome this individual because of the sheer weight. And we learned so many things within that samurai Bushido way. And I'll post on LPoliceRadio.com what the term Bushido means. It's the way of the warrior for the Japanese. And I got to learn it. I got to experience it from my sensei. And I was very, very fortunate to do all that. Did karate help me in my career? I can say without a doubt, yes. It taught me many, many principles of defense. And in the time that I was in the academy, this is how bad it got. This is how shady it got. A lot of people that worked with us knew that we were in, karate and so forth. So they were scaremongers. And what they would say is, you got to be careful. The agency finds out, you get in trouble because you karate chop some guy here. But we would look at the curriculum and we were taught punching, kicking as aspects or elements of self-defense. So this wasn't anything that we were doing that was wrong. Were we going to publicize it? No. Especially if your victim, and I shouldn't say victim, as to the subject, got hurt. So we wanted to do what we were learning in school in karate, but we knew that the element that we had to do was a quick attack because we were going to be attacked. So karate is, if you notice, every defensive mechanism, okay? If you look at kata, they all start with a block and an attack. Everything is block, attack, block, attack. So it's a defensive mechanism of martial art. So we knew that we were always going to be in a position that we were going to be attacked, and we would have to give a rapid attack back, or assault right back. And one of the things that we learned in our art was to blast the opponent so fast they didn't know you were like an airplane on top of them by the time they can react. And after you had several months or years of makiwara training under your belt, believe me, when you punched, it hurt. So then we had to quickly learn how to adapt our academy training in subduing the subject as if he went down and cuffing him, and that would be the end. Okay. In today's law enforcement community, there are holes. And primarily, my discipline, I wasn't really shown what I knew in my law enforcement, in my karate training, how to merge those two together. Today's academy does have other principles that it shows in ground fighting that is instrumental in Judo and Jiu-Jitsu, so it's kind of easier to plug them both together. So I will link everything on our website, LPoliceRadio.com. I encourage all our listeners to get hooked up to Twitter, and my Twitter handle, Alpha Mike, lowercase everything, one word, Alpha Mike 2017. I post everything on there. Everything that, if I'm doing a show, okay, let's say you're looking at my Twitter account and I start posting things on a specific subject, you can rest assured that's probably going to be one of his podcasts. Because as I research, and I do my homework, I throw it on there, and I can refer to those as show notes later on. So I put them out there. So connect with us. Every Thursday we have a show, and we will continue on this one up until February 1st. There's a lot to talk about. A lot to talk about in karate, judo, jiu-jitsu. I encourage you to keep on in this series. Get enthusiastic about what these topics are, because they deal with, if you are an active law enforcement officer, you. If you know someone that is and you're not, it affects them. And if you're neither, but you have officers that protect you and your community, it affects your community policing. So get involved. Listen to these hot topics and these issues that we're throwing out there. We encourage you always to go to our blog, throw your comments on there, become interactive with us. Don't become a dead body on the other side, barely with a pulse, don't even know what the hell he said. But I'm willing to listen to his next show. Folks, I want to add this before we break out to our last segment, and the importance of what was JKA, because we did talk about my sensei and his creation of the Japan Karate-Do International. But the JKA, Japan Karate Association, formed in 1949 under the leadership of Masatoshi Nakayama, and we discussed that Nakayama was influential in Sensei Soji's development, and of course leading into my sensei Saito. And there were others that were legendary karatekas of today, and they were a part of that system. Karatekas such as Nishiyama and Kanazawa, Enoeda, Yahara, Tanaka, Abe, all these are legendary karatekas, and what JK has done is transformed karate traditionally and within sports lines, and we discussed that. But traditionally, there are many of them that are still traditionists to this day, and they have perfected the art. And these are the principles that they perfected: form, balance, and center of gravity, the power and speed, concentration of power, the role of muscular power, rhythm, timing, all very important in your development in karate. How did they do it? Since 1949, under scientific principles. It was a scientific study of karate. We will post more about JKA, JKI, and karate on our website, LPoliceRadio.com. And now it's time, yeah, it is, to have the conversation. You know, we live in an era where you don't know when you're going to be attacked. And that attack necessarily doesn't have to be physical. It could be mental. It could be an attack that overcomes you emotionally as well. You know, the enemy's always out there trying to make your life a living hell. We need to be ready, just like you have to be ready in the issue of defensive tactics or martial arts in your world. In my world, we have to always be at the ready. You also have to be at the ready when it comes to your spiritual world, your emotional world as well. I want to take the opportunity to read this. Not that I have already attained or I am already perfected. But I press on, that I may lay hold of that for which Christ Jesus has also laid hold of me. Brethren, I do not count myself to have apprehended, but one thing I do, forgetting those things which are behind, and reaching forward to those things which are ahead. I press towards the goal for the prize of the upward calling of God in Christ Jesus. Pressing forward. You're building your toolbox, if you're an active law enforcement officer, of bettering yourself, whether that's physical, whether that's within defensive tactics, martial arts, whether that's in firearms, with superiority in school, going to higher grade, higher learning, always getting better. But spiritually, that's the most important. Like the scripture just said, I press towards the goal for the prize of the upward calling of God. So when you seek God, and that becomes your goal, there's a prize for you. It's so important to have that relationship. You know, if you don't train or you do train, there's a bad guy out there somewhere training. Hopefully, he never or she never comes in contact with you. But they're training. And if they do come in contact with you, you want to do like the scripture says, and you want to put on the full armor of the Lord. And you want to protect yourself from that threat that can come, whether it's physical or emotional or spiritually. You're ready. There's no greater gift than serving the living God in the form of Jesus Christ, his only Son, that gave his life for us as sinners, that we can live in grace through his suffering. For us, he did this. That is the greatest gift that any human being can ever have. If you're not religious, you're not spiritual, if you think what I'm saying is pure garbage, this is the part where I turn it off, I don't listen to the end, or whatever your excuse is. Let's just listen to what I just said at the end. He came in the form of a man to suffer for you. He died on a cross for you. He was belittled by the world, spit upon for you to have eternal life. Think about that one. Folks, every Thursday we bring out new content, and we encourage you to be part of our family. LPoliceRadio.com. I'm looking up, and I'm fired up, and I'm out.